pyramids were built as a clock that exactly demarcates the Younger Dryas, thanks to a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. But what even is the precession of the equinoxes? And what has this to do with the pyramids and when they were built? What was the Younger Dryas and what does it have to do with any of this? If you are like me, you may have always wondered what the true purpose of the pyramids of Giza may have been, and, not satisfied with the agreed-upon answer that they were built solely as a grave, you may have come across some strange theories, ranging from they were built by aliens, they were energy generators, all the way to the best of them, they were spaceships. Well, I have come to believe that the pyramids were built to serve as a clock. Not exactly a 12-hour clock, but a clock spanning 26,000 years, made to demarcate a specific time in our history. Because, you see, the pyramids reflect the belt of Orion. This is not disputed, but as so happens, reflecting a constellation may be exactly one of the only ways we have of demarcating a specific time in history. What is most interesting is that, if we take into account the precise time the pyramids were reflecting the belt of Orion, it would change our understanding of human history completely. We embark on a journey through the works of Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock and endeavor to begin unraveling the enigma surrounding the pyramids. In their swirling sands of Egypt during the 1960s, the renowned Egyptologist and architect Dr. Alexander Badawi and the American astronomer Virginia Trimble unveiled something that would set the stage for groundbreaking discoveries. They revealed that the southern shaft of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid was aimed at the Belt of Orion during the Pyramid Age, around 2500 BC. Until then, we had no clue of the correlation between the pyramids and the constellation. Enter Robert Bauval. Inspired by Badawi and Trimble's findings, Bauval started his own observations in 1993, determined to delve deeper into the mysteries of Giza. Mapping the pyramid shafts more precisely, he discovered that, essentially, what they accomplished at Giza with the pyramids was to recreate Orion's belt on the surface of the Earth, with the Nile serving as a guide, as to mirror the Milky Way. But most importantly, he found out that only at one specific date in history would we see Giza reflecting the constellation and the Milky Way perfectly at 10,450 BC, almost 12,000 years ago. Now you might be thinking, this theory makes even less sense. Why would they build those huge things just to demarcate time? And the answer is simple. It was the only way of doing it. You can't really explain to someone the date in which, for example, Julius Caesar was born, without first having a reference. You would say he was born 100 years before Christ, or 653 years ab urbe condita, meaning since the founding of the city of Rome. The Athenians marked the years based on the archonship system. In this system, the year was named after their archon, or chief magistrate, who currently held office. The Athenian year typically began with the first sighting of the new moon after the summer solstice. Each archon served for 1 year, and their names were used to identify this year. They would write in their contracts, for example, I, Archimedes, bought this house from Ptolemy in the 10th of March in the year which Hippocrates was archon. But is there not a universal reference that we could use? Because when really was Hippocrates archon, or Rome founded, or Jesus born? Just think about it. We cannot determine years unless we keep counting them. We only know that Hippocrates was archon 566 years before Jesus was born because of a long chain of documented references. But what if we lost the reference? How do we determine a date then? Imagine you got stranded on a desert island and completely lost track of time. After a few decades, you managed to make a boat to escape and want to leave a message on the island detailing in which year you left. How would you do that? This is where the precession of the equinoxes comes in. But what is precession? Imagine Earth is like a spinning top. You know how a top wobbles a bit as it spins? Well, Earth does a similar wobble as it spins around the Sun. This wobble isn't huge, but it is enough to make a difference on observed stars from our point of view. This wobble causes the position of the equinoxes, the longitude where day and night are equal, to shift slowly over thousands of years, completing a precession in 26,000 years. This also means that where the constellation seems to be, shift gradually over the night sky. It is the only reliable event the Earth does that spans a period of time large enough to be used like a clock, and one of the only non-mechanical or document-based ways we have of pinpointing a specific time in history. But there is a catch. It can only be used in spans of 26,000 years. After this period of time has passed, the reference is lost, because the Earth would have completed its precession. Now that you know what the precession of the equinoxes is, if you were to actually try and set a reliable date, how would you go about doing it? Let's make things even more complicated. How would you set up a date without using any language? This is important to our theory, so carry on with me. If you were to leave a message pinpointing a date that would last enough time for a future civilization that knows nothing about you or your language, there would be very few ways of doing it. Back to our desert island. To pinpoint the date you left the island, you would have to leave a series of structures pointing precisely to a specific set of stars or constellation. If people come after you and do the calculations, they will find out how much the stars have moved from where the structure is pointing and find out the date you left. Simple enough, right? But how do you bring people to understand that this structure is even meant for this purpose? Even more so, using no language whatsoever. If you go to Hoover Dam, you will see a bronze statue surrounded by engravings on the ground. Built in 1931, the engineer of Hoover Dam wanted to create a clock that would allow visitors of an extremely distant future to be able to figure out, astronomically, when the dam was built. He imagined a future where current languages no longer existed, but where math, astronomy and physics would have remained. So, rather than embedding a written history to date the dam, he chose to use a celestial map based on the precession of the equinoxes. For this purpose, they engraved on the ground 209 metal discs representing all of the celestial bodies and stars that were visible with the naked eye on the night of the inauguration. The conjunction of discs would allow us to pinpoint the precise date that the dam was built. This is exactly the purpose that the pyramids were built for, but the agreed upon date that they represent the stars is 2500 BC, because this is when archaeologists think they were built. Robert Bauval, though, found that the pyramids may be in correlation with the Belt of Orion at many different times, depending on the point of reference, but at only one precise point in time, during the last 26,000 years, did it match an exact alignment. In his words, at 10,450 BC, and at that date only, we find that the pattern of the pyramids on the ground provides a perfect reflection of the pattern of the stars in the sky. I mean, it's a perfect match, faultless, and it cannot be an accident, because the entire arrangement correctly depicts two very unusual celestial events that occurred only at that time. But this is not all. Measuring the Great Pyramid, you find out that they are made to be a precise scaling down of the Earth in terms of its base and height. Graham Hancock, in his book The Fingerprints of the Gods, wrote, "As near as makes no difference, therefore, the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base is indeed 1 to 43,200 of the equatorial circumference of the Earth, and as near as makes no difference, the height of the Great Pyramid above that base is indeed 1 to 43,200 of the polar radius of the Earth. So, the base of the Great Pyramid and its height are precisely 43,200 times smaller than the circumference of the Earth and the North Pole, respectively. But what has this number to do with the placement of the pyramids and their relation to the Belt of Orion? Well, as it so happens, the number 43,200 is repeated in a bunch of different myths and structures around the world in similar manners, sometimes appearing as 4,320 or 432. But what is most shocking is what Graham writes next. It is surely remarkable enough that the Great Pyramid should be able to function as an accurate scale model of the northern hemisphere of planet Earth, but it is even more remarkable that the scale involved should incorporate numbers relating precisely to one of the key planetary mechanisms of the Earth. This is the fixed and apparently eternal precession of its axis of rotation around the pole of the ecliptic, a phenomenon which causes the vernal point to migrate around the band of the zodiac at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, and 30 degrees, or one complete zodiacal constellation, every 2,160 years. Precession through two zodiacal constellations, or 60 degrees along the ecliptic, takes 4,320 years. In other words, the time that it takes for two constellations to pass by a fixed point in the sky is 4,320 years. But why two constellations? Could not they have built the Great Pyramid with the measurements relating to the passing of just one constellation, with a scale of 1 to 21,600? Our answer might lie within the Sphinx, which sits very near the pyramids and, believe it or not, points precisely to the constellation of Leo once every 26,000 years, because of the precession explained previously. The real mind blow comes when you realize when was the last time that the Sphinx pointed to Leo. Have a guess? Yes, exactly around the year 10,450 BC. Believe it or not, it is too much of a coincidence that these pyramids are perfectly aligned to Orion, while the Sphinx precisely points to Leo exactly at the same time in history. What's more, the American geologist Robert Scott, who analyzed the Sphinx greatly, firmly believes that it cannot have been built in the year 2500 BC, but that it must have been built around 11,000 BC. The evidence is overwhelming that the site of Giza must have something to do with our ancient past. It is really unsettling that all of this is being swept under the rug and being tagged as pseudo-archaeology. But anyway, now you might be asking, why is the year 10,450 BC so important? Because many researchers point out that some kind of cataclysm happened precisely around this time, the time of the Younger Dryas. The agreed upon narrative is that a devastating, lightning-fast ice age started around 11,000 BC, called the Younger Dryas. But what caused this ice age is still very much debated. The theories for the cataclysm range from a meteor all the way to massive eruptions and solar flares. But the most shocking fact comes when you stop to think about what comes after a sudden, short-lasting ice age. A deluge. A world flooding so severe that leaves no chance for any civilization to pull through. The deluge is mentioned not only in the Testament but also in many other cultures around the world in very similar manners. Cultures that never had contact before, such as the Greeks, the Mayans, the Indonesians and of course the Hebrews. So, according to all the myths and the probable scale of the cataclysm that took place during this time, although we still haven't found any signs of a lost civilization yet, it is very likely that if one existed, it would have been obliterated. Just in comparison, 95% of people living in towns during the Bronze Age collapse 3,000 years ago died of starvation. Those were hardy people, used to living in harsh conditions. Our current civilization is much more fragile and dependent on a global network of trade. If we were to experience the things that happened around the Younger Dryas, we would be sent back to being hunter-gatherers in a single generation. So, the Younger Dryas devastated the Earth in levels that can only be seen in movies, such as 2012, and the pyramids, like a clock, point exactly to this event. The only thing left to find out is what message were the builders trying to convey to us. I have a couple of very interesting theories to share with you about this, but it is a topic for another video. Thank you for watching.